you afterwards. It's kind of nice.
I know, to be able to go back and watch, you don't have to necessarily watch it. I like to do that with the council meetings.
I watched some council meetings.
Mhm.
Get a feedback.
Okay, so we are muted. Okay, so we are live. On here live. Okay, so our Zoom. Okay, so whenever you are ready, feel free to get in the meeting.
All right, we're going to call to order the meeting of the North Bend Planning Commission. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for the April 20th, 2020 meeting. Did everyone receive their minutes and have the opportunity to review them?
Yep.
Do you have any additions or revisions?
When we adopt the minutes as presented.
A second. All right, we have a motion to adopt the minutes in a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, the minutes are approved. All right, so for today, we have one scheduled public hearing. And before, is anyone else on? Yes. Okay, and so,
Jane Stebbins is on, and then Lawrence
we
Shield
do have other people.
and Lonnie
Okay.
Schreiber. to
So
comment.
since we have other people here, we will go through the protocols, the procedures and for the public hearing. The way it will work, we'll open the public hearing and the plan commission will take care of some administrivia. Once we do that, we will have our staff give us a staff report on the case. After that, well, the staff report is the applicant essentially in this, this public hearing. So Chelsea, the city planner, will fill us in on why on this proposal. At that time, we'll open up the commissioners will ask questions of staff, then we'll open it up for comments from the public. We will first ask for comments in favor and in support of the proposal. After that, we will ask for comments in opposition to the proposal. Typically, we allow 3 minutes for public comment. In this platform, we might be able to add an extra minute or two just because we're unaccustomed to doing this via Zoom instead of in person. But after all that, we will close the public hearing. Chelsea will add any last comments that she might have on behalf of the city. And then we'll close the public portion and we as commissioners will deliberate and discuss what we've heard and what our, how we want to proceed. And we will, if we are ready and prepared, we'll hear motions and make a recommendation. Okay, with all that said, so now I'm ready to open up the public hearing. With glasses. All right, case number AMD 1-20. Zone text amendment, proposed amendments to North Bend City Code Title 18, zoning to include regulations specific to short-term rental standards. Subject property, the city of North Bend limits. Applicable criteria is chapter 18.84 North Bend City Code Amendment Procedure. Okay, so before we get started, commissioners, in this case, I doubt if anyone made a site visit because you have to visit the entire city. Did anyone have ex parte conversations in regard to this matter that should be disclosed, or do you have a potential conflict of interest that needs to be disclosed? No? Okay. Would anyone in the public like to challenge any of the commissioners from serving on this hearing?
They've been in a waiting room. So yeah, you can ask them again real quick.
Okay. At this point, I have asked the commissioners if any of them had any ex parte conversations or potential conflicts of interest that they felt they needed to disclose. And they all responded to the negative on that. But we'd like to give the public the opportunity. Would anyone in the public like to challenge any of the commissioners from serving on this public hearing?
No.
All right.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so with that, we will continue on. We'll start with Chelsea giving us a staff report and the city proposal.
Okay, so Planning Commission's aware, this is something Planning Commission wanted to look at, setting forth some clear standards. As it is now, the best we have to go by is a bed and breakfast type use, which really implies you have an owner occupied building in only certain residential zones. And so at the time we got our first application for an Airbnb, we decided we needed to move forward and look at some clear standards that were efficient for reviewing and permitting for both staff and applicants. So we had 2 work sessions, and out of those 2 work sessions comes the proposed amendments, which are in attachment A, which is of the packet at the top page. It's actually page 15, well, 14 and 15 of 38. So you can see those there. Through these discussions, Planning Commission noted that it was very important to find a way through regulation that we could balance the city's need to maintain a supply of permanent housing at affordable rates for all of our residents, with the desire of short-term rental operators to profit from their investments. And so you can see the summary of proposed amendments on page 2, again on page 14 and 15, the full extent. There were some, after further consideration, you can see on page attachment B, which is page 26 of 38. We were going to originally remove boarding and lodging because it conflicts with short-term rentals. It's essentially a short-term rental use. But after thinking about it more, historically, the city has used boarding and lodging to permit assisted living facilities and nursing homes. And so rather than to just remove that, I recommend that we change the text to say that we want this to be for assisted living facilities and nursing homes. So you'll see that change.
Chelsea, before you go any further, I brought my printed copy that came in the mail, and the pages don't match any of yours.
Oh, and are you looking at the top? Because there's 2 sets of numbers.
Oh.
And I know it's hard to, I know it's hard.
At the bottom. Thank you.
So page 26 is where I'm at right
Okay,
now.
thank you.
But I just want to make that note that that's a change from the original application. And it also would necessitate a change in the parking requirements, which really would come down to us removing the rooming, boarding, lodging houses, and just replacing that with assisted living facilities. Nursing homes are already addressed in the code. So that is a change I wanted to talk about. And then some comments. We did receive comments, one being from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. They were very impressed with Commission's proposal, what we had come up with for regulations and how that worked to address housing needs. They did have a concern about if you go back to page 14 at the bottom, we were talking about allowing attached ADUs to be used for short-term rentals, whereas today no ADU, attached or detached, could be used. And they suggest we consider that further as to whether that really meets the goal 10 for housing, and whether or not that's something we want to do. So I want to throw that out there to you. Other than that, we had comments from, I'll go ahead and read them because they were submitted online. One from.
Before you go past that
Yes.
last statement, were you saying that we shouldn't include the attached ADUs?
I'm saying it's been brought to our attention that we might want to consider just
Not-
leaving it as it is today and not making any changes.
Uh-huh,
So that's for planning commission you guys can discuss.
okay.
And when you say leaving it how it is, remind me how it is.
So how it is today is no ADU, attached or detached, can be used for short-term rental purposes. The point being that we were trying to add long-term housing. And so in here, we're proposing that only detached ADUs not be used for short-term rental use, meaning if you had an attached ADU, you could. So we just want to consider how that plays out. Okay, and then I have two comments in opposition. One from Greta Krost, who is a Lakeside resident, but I believe she owns at least one Airbnb. And she says that vacation rentals are important for our community. They give income to the homeowners who use the money to keep up the property and pay for house cleaners and excellent wage. Many of the cleaners are seniors, single parents, or others who are on a fixed income and rely on this money and the flexibility of the income. Guests also appreciate staying in vacation rentals versus a hotel. And she asks, please do not limit the occupancy. And then the second written comment was from a Tabitha Pitts of 1823 Oak Street in North Bend. And she says, I request my written comments be entered into the record. I would like to discourage limiting short-term rentals only being able to be rented for 90 days out of the year. I am a single mother supporting my daughter on income earned by cleaning vacation rentals here locally. If you limit us to only being able to rent them for 90 days, you will be leaving me without an income to support my daughter. This doesn't even factor in how much of our tourism business it will kill and further depress our economy. Please do not consider putting this into effect. So those are the two written comments I received. I wanted to make sure those were on the record. But other than that, Planning Commission does have in attachment C, which is page 29 at the top, the proposed findings, which do address all of the goals and all of the policies in our applicable policies in the comp plan, and does find that Planning Commission can recommend approval as is or with any changes based on testimony or further consideration. So they can recommend approval of the proposal based on those findings. And so I recommend Planning Commission, discuss the things we talked about further. We do have at least two, if not three individuals on for comment. I am not exactly sure how they weigh in as for, opposed, or neutral to. So we might just ask the first one to come on and state their case whenever you are.
I can't read the name, so if you
Um,
select.
Okay. So the first one we'll go with is Lonnie Schreiber. I'm gonna unmute. Okay. Lonnie unmuted herself. So when Lonnie's ready, she can give her name and address
Okay.
and how she stands.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. My name is Lonnie Schreiber. My address is 1371 Bayview Street, which is in the Simpson Heights area of North Bend. I am against this proposal the way it stands. I'm not against some kind of policy going in place. I've been a very successful Airbnb owner in our area for 2+ years. I own 2 Airbnbs. I employ 1.5 employees full-time at a very good wage of $25 an hour. Cleaners, handymen, yardmen, yard care, florists. My Airbnb does a ton of advertising for our area. I support local businesses by providing local products in our Airbnb, which then promotes their business and encourages our guests to go use them. I pay transient taxes, a large amount of transient taxes to the city of North Bend for every guest that I have. I also pay Coos Health and Wellness for my health inspection and my license. And so it's all licensed and cleaned, and I follow strictly their guidelines. And I just have a lot of testimonies from families that come to check out Coos Bay North Bend for a place to live, and also come to visit, who choose our area because of the quality of mine and other Airbnbs. And they look along the whole entire coast, and they choose to come here because of that. And so I guess I'm just not really quite understanding how limiting us to 92 days per year of occupancy in an Airbnb is going to encourage long-term rentals. I actually own 3 homes. One is a long-term rental, which I rent out to a family now for 4 years. And my other 2 are Airbnbs, which bring a lot of tourism and revenue into our area. And I don't understand how limiting to 92 days will encourage long-term rental, because I can't rent long-term and then kick someone out and open my home up for 3 months and then rent again. I'm not quite understanding how, if the goal is to encourage long-term rentals, which I'm in favor of, but how limiting us. I would propose something more limiting the number of Airbnbs, or limiting the amount of licenses that can go to Airbnbs, but I'm strongly opposed to limiting the number of days.
If you don't mind, I have 2 questions I'd like to ask. First
Sure.
is just a comment on the long-term, encouraging long-term rental. The thought of restricting part of the year, or restricting how many days it could be rented during the year, is to make it more attractive to landlords to rent full-time without the short-term rental. And so that was the basis to it, was to encourage people to keep some houses in long-term and not just switching to a more lucrative short-term. But I do understand your point, and you stated it very well. The other question I have for you is, I was wondering if you could fill us in a little bit on how many nights a year does a successful Airbnb rent? How many nights in a year have you been renting your Airbnb?
I actually am there. I am at the elite status of Airbnb, and so I'm a plus. There's only 3 in our area, and both of mine are on the plus status. So I actually have quite a few rentals. I'm at 100% occupancy from about May to November, and then I am between 90 and 95 for the rest of the time. In the winter, a lot of times I have people contact me that want to stay for a month as they come look for houses in our area. They have jobs here and they don't want to stay in a hotel or motel with their family and their children. So I'm 100% in the summer, in the spring, summer, and fall, and between 90 and 95 in the winter.
Okay, so 300 plus days a year, or nights a year?
For sure, plus, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that background.
Lanny, this is Wayne Shrunk. The rentals that you've been doing on there, have they been to tourists or have they been to the work crews up on the bridge?
I haven't personally had any work crews. Last year, for the past 2 years, I did house a helicopter crew who worked for the county, who rented from me for 2.5 months at a time. And they would rent, they worked to fight fires. Their helicopters supported the firefighting efforts, but primarily it's tourism. I have a pretty high-end Airbnb, and I do not attract a lot of the workforce.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any more questions?
I would love to just add one more thing, that my Airbnb is much more affordable in the summertime than hotels. Hotels can run 200 plus, and the highest my Airbnb ever runs is 170 a night, and it can accommodate a family of 5. So it brings a big attraction to people staying there with families.
All right, thank you for the background.
Okay, are we ready for the
Sure.
next? Okay, Lonnie, you did. Okay, so I am going to unmute. It'll work. Unmute Lawrence Chill, or ask Lawrence to unmute himself. There you go.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself.
Okay.
Could you start by giving us your name and address, please?
Yeah, my name is Lawrence Cheel. I'm here with my wife, Julie Batchelor. Address is 429 Simpson Avenue in North Bend in the Simpson Heights area. And we are opposed to obviously some of the requirements in this proposal. So obviously you probably remember us from 3 months ago, April 20th, we were before you as I think the second individuals to do a conditional use permit. We followed all the requirements that are outlined in this proposal. We do have a concern with the 92 days duration. That's the only thing we have a problem with. We don't have many Airbnbs in North Bend, and Airbnbs offer a great alternative to families instead of hotels, especially in this day and age of coronavirus. Many families prefer to be self-sufficient, cook at home, enjoy the area, but not be too exposed. We agree with Lainey. Airbnbs create an experience like no other. Many of our guests are planning to return to this area because of the experience they had at the Airbnb. Good hosts, direct guests to local restaurants, local businesses, local attractions. And I know our guests have all supported local areas that we have in our guidebook. As a host, we buy stuff from Cranberry Sweets that we give to all the guests. We provide them coffee from Bayside Coffee. We purchase breakfast items from Safeway. We purchase cleaning supplies locally. So we do have an extensive trickle-down effect type thing. Without Airbnbs in North Bend or a limited period of occupation, guests that prefer staying in an Airbnb versus a hotel will choose other locations. We are also, as Lainey, we pay housekeepers, landscapers. We support, a lot of local businesses. In regards to a 92-day occupancy duration, an Airbnb is a business, and we have our business license. We're complying with everything. Most business owners have a significant investment in their business and rely on a yearly revenue. I don't think many other businesses would operate in North Bend if they were only able to operate a quarter of the year. Basically, you're just, and I understand the reason, but you're discouraging anyone from owning an Airbnb in North Bend. In regards to being able to switch between a short-term rental to a long-term rental in the same calendar year is basically, you can't do it. And there are extensive rights that tenants have now. We have another long-term rental in Simpson Heights. We have a long-term rental in Coos Bay. And we have a really tough time now collecting rents, maintaining the property. It is very hard. With our Airbnb, I'm over there, my wife is over there on a weekly basis, at least typically. And we are able to maintain the property, beautify the property, which, as obviously you got the reports from our neighbors when we were doing the conditional use process. North Bend benefits from Airbnbs with property taxes. We pay a lot in transient room tax, support local businesses, restaurants, employment of local cleaners, and we beautify the area. Our suggestions are, instead of a 92-day occupancy limit, we suggest encouraging all North Bend Airbnbs to get conditional use permits and business license. We also suggest limiting people from out of state purchasing our properties for short-term rentals and managing them from afar. We also suggest North Bend coordinate with Airbnb so that transient room tax can just be collected automatically from Airbnb. That would save any fraudulent activities. We also suggest the city limit the number of Airbnbs within North Bend versus limiting the number of days it can operate. Those that have met the city's criteria with regards to conditional use permit, business licensing, and safety requirements being free to operate year-round and manage locally. I got one more thing, and then I'll let this continue. I think this is a great opportunity for North Bend to be part of short-term rentals and the benefits for both the city and the community. We can promote our beautiful area to the rest of the country and actually the rest of the world. The economic trickle-down effect is extensive. We understand the need for affordable housing, but there's also a need in North Bend for visitors to have a choice between or an alternative to a hotel, and that's what an Airbnb is. Otherwise, visitors might just pass us by, and then obviously the businesses that we support won't be supported. As an Airbnb owner, we have followed all the requirements that are required by us, by the city of North Bend. We just want to be able to operate year round and be able to make a profit rather than being limited to only 92 nights. If we were limited to 92 nights, I'm sure we would just keep our house vacant the other, portion of the year, the other 3/4 of the year, and try to figure it out. This is a business opportunity that we ventured into, and I don't think any other business in North Bend would operate in North Bend if they were only able to operate a quarter of the, or get revenue a quarter of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions, Lawrence?
Yeah, Lawrence, this is Wayne Shrunk.
Wayne.
I thought yours wasn't limited to 92 because you had a full-time renter in the apartment.
We actually have the opportunity to rent the apartment downstairs. We have not completed that because obviously revenues are still, so we have the opportunity that we could comply with everything. But I still think as a business owner with an Airbnb, most of the Airbnbs in the town probably don't have the opportunity to live on premises or have a person downstairs. And I'm just, I think we could comply with this 92-day requirement, but I'm not in agreement with it. And that's why I'm opposed.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to just make sure Jane knows that she can chime in for discussions at any time,
Okay.
but those are the only comments we have. Planning Commission,
All right.
feel free to.
Commissioners, do you want any staff to dig out any more information before we start our deliberations?
I guess I just wanted more clarification on the,
I can't hear you.
Okay.
I just wanted more clarification on the ADUs that are internal, so not the detached.
Mm-hmm.
If we have to separate out that, and those can't apply to short-term rentals, how do you differentiate between an ADU and a short-term rental if it's not detached?
If I may, my understanding was an ADU can allow the second kitchen in the house in a full apartment, whereas an internal Airbnb is renting your spare room.
Right, and so, but if we were to say attached ADUs, which would have their own separate facilities,
We would promote the
could
second.
be short-term rentals, then we would be kind of in conflict with our housing needs. So that's what I
I
think.
mean, I'm thinking of the first short-term rental that we looked at,
Yes.
where it was a woman and she had essentially like an attached apartment. And so would she no longer be able to utilize that as a short-term rental?
Did she have an attached or just a bedroom?
It was
Just a
just a
bedroom.
bedroom.
But
I think it was a couple of rooms, but she didn't have a
she
kitchen.
didn't have a
It wasn't
have a
kitchen.
kitchen.
Okay.
Yeah.
But at this, and just to that point though, when somebody came in for, I want a short-term rental or I want an ADU, they'd have to make that statement up front, and then on the record moving forward, they either have an ADU or they have a short-term rental. So they kind of have to pick. And then I guess I just want to make sure everybody's aware. I think that Planning Commission understands that, North Benders, they want to, when they own property, they want to be able to do what they want with their property to the extent that's, reasonable and within zoning allowances. And I don't think that anybody wants to prohibit or unnecessarily limit any kind of business ventures, but it's also important to remember that for planning and zoning, the zoning is there for a reason. And so our residential zones are there not for business endeavors, really. They're there for residential use. And so now we have bed and breakfasts, and that's a commercial use, but it's really the intent is that somebody's living there, they're managing the property. And so it's different in that respect. Today's modern Airbnbs, majority are people who just buy houses and that's their business. They're making profits off of renting those. And so it's just a fine line and a balance that we want to try to find in addressing housing needs, but also understanding the desire of our residents to want to profit from their investments. But it does come down to zoning and, you're in a residential zone for residential use versus commercial zones, commercial use.
All right, with that, we will technically close the public hearing and begin our discussions. And I guess I'd like to lead it off. When you're in your emails, you mentioned that the fair housing people wanted us to take a look at what we were doing with the ADUs. And so I stopped and reflected on our ADU and our ADU ordinance that we came up with. That was driven strictly by the need for affordable housing. The state legislature felt that ADUs provided a mechanism for affordable housing in existing neighborhoods by the creation of ADUs, either internal or external. And with no discussion of making those commercial properties for Airbnbs or vacation rentals. And we varied when we put together our ordinance to satisfy that requirement to have a provision for ADUs, we had to relax essentially some of our zoning requirements in residential areas. We allowed second dwelling units in zoning areas that previously had never allowed second dwelling units. And we did that solely for the purpose of helping with the affordable housing shortage. And if we were to open up and allow people to build an ADU, or either put a second apartment in their house, or over the garage, or in their backyard, and then convert it to a vacation rental, that totally wipes out any affordable housing, long-term housing opportunities on that property. And I think that, I personally feel that would violate our intent with the ADU ordinance. And so I personally, after I really pondered it, I truly feel we responded to the state's cry for affordable housing when we passed the ADU, and my gut tells me we should stick with it being just for affordable housing, not vacation rental.
I basically agree, while I totally understand and even an individual's right, this is my property, I should be able to do, and capitalism there, and it's a little tough to me because, on the one hand, I'm thinking about, trying to keep that in mind and bear that in mind, for our residents that want to do something. But ultimately, honestly, I mean, at the risk of sounding, I think the whole purpose of this, and agreeing with you totally, is to try and gain affordable housing or more housing for, when's the last time our vacancy or for any sort of rentals has been greater than, it's been below 5% for the last 5 or 8 years. Honestly, don't know the exact statistics, but so I'm in total agreement with you. I personally wouldn't necessarily be against if we were talking about before increasing it a little more, but at this, what's another 30 days? Yeah, instead of 92 days, maybe get them, so like a trimester of a year instead of a quarter. But
yeah, I'm much more prone to want to discuss the limitations of the duration rather than the ADU.
Mhm.
The ADU has a very specific purpose.
absolutely.
Yeah, now if they want to rent a spare bedroom, fine, that's not an ADU.
Correct.
But to go build an apartment or somewhere, that to me we had a very specific purpose when we approved that. And allowed everyone the opportunity to do that regardless of their residential zone. So I think there's a second issue, yeah, which I want to discuss separately. That's why I cut off. that duration. Yeah, because, yeah, so I started out with the ADU and the other, I had two other items. I only said one, but two others. One is the duration, which I'd love to talk about. The other is the density of vacation rental. I did notice when I reviewed Coos Bay and Bandon, both of them had a limitation on how many, vacation rentals they could have. Coos Bay said you can only have one every 300 feet. And Bandon, I believe, said 30% of the dwellings in a 250-foot radius, and that just sounds like a nightmare to me. But we probably don't want our whole neighborhood to turn into one giant vacation rental.
So when I did research this initially, I saw those same kind of limitations in some of the communities. And it's extremely hard to regulate, like the 1 per 300 square feet area of another, or keep up with that. I think it's Newport does, or Lincoln City does a maximum number of licenses. That would be better than 1 per 300 square feet. I think that would be hard for
It
us to
would, but
keep up with.
At the same token, if you did a maximum number and you grow, so then, we allow 10, we have 10 in there and somebody wants to do it again, so then does it become a lottery?
It becomes that, and that's why that wasn't proposed either, because that's
Yeah.
hard too. You're really,
Because then, you have somebody who has this and all of a sudden, oh, they didn't get their license.
right, not everybody gets the fair
Yeah, I would think,
chance.
yeah, the banding rate, 30% within 200, that's crazy. But it seems like I don't know if we have them or if it's county or whatever, but there are ordinances that say if you're within, you can violate the setback if everyone within 250 of your property is violating the setback. Okay, so if we keep it a simple measurement, like if there are no other vacation rentals within 250 feet down the street, that would prevent the neighborhood from turning into a vacation rental neighborhood.
It would. I still don't know that it necessarily addresses our need for housing. You
Well,
have to
that-
look
that
at
would
the
be
numbers.
separate.
Yeah.
That would, it would limit it in one way.
So you're talking above and beyond, because currently we're not proposing any density.
Yeah, right now. we're
So
not
you're
doing any of
suggesting-
it. Yeah, would that help maintain our residential natures?
Mhm.
Which, we want, the whole thing about Airbnb is to be part of the neighborhood, but if the whole neighborhood is a vacation rental.
No, I understand.
Right. Plus, well, in reality, to me also though, you're basically gonna be, let's be realistic, you're not gonna get an Airbnb on Kellogg, probably an Empire, you know what I mean? So-
Actually, it's a surprise.
I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, like we said, we have
Yeah.
2 of them they're
I-
talking about in the Simpson Heights,
Right.
And I think there's another one we found out that was over, was the airport.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
quite a few that we don't know about.
But I mean, there's, obviously there's gonna be neighborhoods that people will try and target more for, obvious reasons. I mean, if you go and you look out in the bay there, like at Simpson Heights, you potentially have a beautiful view. And you can get neighborhoods where some sort of density may, I don't say
Yeah.
be needed or should be discussed anyways.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just add that a lot of the other regulations as far as garbage service and contacts were aimed at trying to maintain that residential nature.
So those were just my 3 topics. One is the number of days, and that I would love to discuss, but I wanted to throw out my other 2 things. And the ADUs, I think should be ADUs. And just to make sure we're comfortable not having the location restriction. Anyone, who's next?
I would like to, I'd like to discuss at some point, the folks who already have operating businesses such as Lonnie and more sort of busy spending, we'll find something. They've been up and operating and they've been doing things, even though they didn't get all the correct permits. Versus those who want to start an Airbnb in the future. Because in the case of Lonnie and Lawrence and others, they have an investment in that. And I've owned businesses, if you can't make a profit, you go out of business. I was that guy, I was a nonprofit business. But I would still like to kind of put the brakes on other folks coming in, particularly from out of town or out of state, and buying up all the real estate, buying everything in Simpson Heights, for instance, and turning it into an Airbnb. But I still think that we need to recognize those people who do have an investment. Somehow, does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't know that we were excluding them. But
Excluding,
the ones with the existing, the people who've come
well,
to us with.
I'd like to see them differently, I suppose.
I don't think,
Very
I don't think you can, because it'd be like if I said, you know, I have a Ferrari and I can go 200 miles per hour and I've had it since before the speed limit was enacted, then I should be able to drive 200 miles per hour because I can. I think we have to be consistent with our rules and apply it to the whole city, not, I just can't.
I agree with you on that.
And those that have come for a permit or a conditional use have been made aware that there will be new regulations, new ordinances coming down the pike.
In the last 3 weeks, I've been approached by quite a few different people wanting to buy Airbnbs. Now, they didn't know we're doing this at the council, they weren't even local people.
Mhm.
They're wanting to find out what the market is for Airbnbs in the North Bend area. And it goes back to the same concern that we pointed out before, is that we're gonna end up getting a lot of people. If we make it lax for some, that's gonna open it up for everyone else, and we're gonna end up having the problem of people coming in and buying up prime homes and using them for Airbnbs. And I understand what Lawrence is saying about, you know, a business can't survive on that. Well, I feel bad about that, yes, but we have zones for a reason. And residential is not a place for business. It's like, okay, if we allow that business, are we gonna allow a medical center to come in next door? What other businesses are we gonna start allowing to come into a residential zone that does not allow business except under certain circumstances? And so I don't think the Airbnb qualifies underneath our home occupation that we allow certain business to function, because there can be no sign of it actually being a business. And so I just get very concerned about opening up our residential zoning to businesses, and people using it like where the intent was for people that have a home that want to rent out part of their home or something as a vacation rental. Okay, we can allow that, but I think what's the new trend is that this is the new hotel. Well, we have hotels in a commercial zone for a reason, you know, so that they're not bothering the neighborhood. And to limit it, I think we even talked about that as far as limiting it. How are we ever going to limit it? And who are we going to say no to? And as soon as we do, are we going to be sued for allowing this person to have one, but you won't allow me 2 blocks away to have one? And I think we need to have the stuff written out such that it's pretty plain and it's going to be the same for all of them. Now, there's two things that I did put in here, and unfortunately, if I say the same things as you guys, I couldn't hear anything you said,
Oh, sorry.
nothing.
That's what
And
I-
so, if I say the same thing you did, forgive me. But the first thing that I wanted to find out on was, on page 14 of 38, on the definition, you have, short-term rental means short-term lodging provided within a dwelling constructed with a building permit. And I believe I mentioned before that we have a lot of old homes that were probably built before building permits that, are historic homes that would be a great place for a, deal. So I'm a little bit concerned about that.
So I guess I could speak to that. Currently, the current policy is on those older homes. If, it's a lot, it's almost expected that there's not going to be a building permit in the file. And so you just operate in terms of they were permitted.
Grandfather.
Yeah, grandfathered in. Can you hear that, Wayne?
Yeah.
Did you hear me? So for the older ones, it would just be assumed they have a building permit.
All
It
right.
would be the newer homes, or if somebody wanted to build something brand new, that they get a building permit for it. It's not,
Okay.
just a shed in the backyard, that's kind of the intent.
All right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. Then the other question and concern that I had was, on the ADU, the detached one, the attached ADUs that we're going to allow.
Mhm.
I believe I kind of heard something that you were against changing that.
No, after I thought about it, I think all ADUs should be excluded.
Yeah, I don't think we should have it in there.
Okay.
Because the whole purpose of the ADUs was for the rent, provide housing for people. And so, the only concern that I have on that is, in just talking at one point, I have a house that I built that does not have an ADU on it. But you had mentioned, in talking one time, that mother-in-law apartment, or that extra space that I have in there, would actually be an ADU. And would that be an ADU? Would we be taking people that may have a house big enough that they want somebody in there that it's not actually an ADU? See, mine wasn't built as an ADU. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to do that, but we have a lot of places around town that have mother-in-law apartments and stuff like that. And if we start calling every place with an extra kitchen or an extra stove, I think is what determines it as an extra unit, an ADU, then are we doing an injustice to those that the house was not built as an ADU? Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think I was kind of speaking about this earlier. If at the time you come in, you put down on the record, do you want that to be called an ADU? Do you want it to be, just it's grandfathered in as it was built this way? It's not an ADU, and so you want it to be used for other purposes, but you as the owner applicant would have to make that statement up front, and then you move forward based on how you have chose to qualify that. That would be for existing,
Okay.
buildings such as that. And we could certainly try to come up with some kind of language maybe that makes it clearer, but
I see what you're saying, but my question is if someone has a big basement, they decided, wow, this would make a great guest suite, I just need to add a kitchen and a bathroom. Now, they're not gonna come in and say, I want an ADU, because that's not their purpose.
mhm.
So in the building permit process, would it be flagged as building a vacation rental in their house?
Well, so today, if it was something brand new and we were getting it today, it would be flagged. If it wasn't in a zone that allowed 2 dwellings, then we would say, whoa, you have more dwellings than you are allowed. Is your intent to have an ADU? And so based on today, yes, we would say, whoa, that looks like an ADU, and it would likely be permitted as an ADU, but then it would remove your chance from being able to just rent it out perpetually as a short-term
Right,
rental
and
too.
if we take out the attached ADU line that I
Mm-hmm.
think is in there now, if we just take that out, if someone came to get a building permit for a second kitchen for the purpose of a vacation rental, an interior vacation rental, it would be denied because of zoning, no zoning compliance, it was out of compliance.
Correct, because we would say you can't, because we would say that's an ADU and you can't use it for a short-term rental.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get that?
Yeah, yeah. I think the hard part is the change of command, because like, take my place, for example. When I applied for the permit, it was listed as another kitchen and everything, as a guest quarters, and they had no problem with it. So it went in as a guest quarters.
Yeah.
And, but in today, if I'm understanding it right, if I would bring that in there today, you'd be looking at it and say, well, you can't have another kitchen in here or whatever. That would be a separate unit. Is that correct?
Correct. And the code is out. So, I don't know, can't speak for what was happening when yours was permitted, but the code has always said a guest house does not have cooking, a guest facility, whatever, does not have cooking facilities. So I'm not sure how they were looking at it, but it was done, it was permitted. And so we certainly look at it as having been, grandfathered in, kind of legal, non-conforming.
So yours was built under a building permit, so it
Mhm.
satisfies that
Yeah.
thing.
So what would happen if Wayne sold that house? So if Wayne sold that house and the person wanted to use it as a short-term rental, they couldn't because it would be considered an ADU, correct? Is it as a kitchen?
No, his was constructed with a building permit, and it hasn't been declared as an
Okay.
ADU.
Right. It would just go back through that history, the chain of history.
I mean, that's, so if somebody, I'm trying to think, it'd be terrible in town here, and let's say like a lakeside, like in Lakeside, if you have a lake there, somebody's building it and to where they have a main kitchen upstairs, but they also wanted to put a kitchen downstairs, say in a daylight basement, because it had it opened up instead of having to go all the way upstairs. That would be, so you're saying that would, I mean, obviously I could see a flag or a question, but that would be rejected?
So say that again, a daylight.
Actually, what I've seen them on, where basically you have a basement,
Mm-hmm.
Like a daylight basement or just
Opens up,
downstairs.
yeah.
Effectively not unlike Wayne's,
Mm-hmm.
Of where you have basically like a main kitchen, but you have another kitchen down,
Mm-hmm.
like basically like say it's closer to the beach,
Yeah.
Or a rec room kitchen.
Or, right, a rec room kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
that would be flagged as, or just rejected.
Well, it's all going to depend on what zone you're in, and then it's going to depend on, let me look at the definition real quick of our, just so we can get this right for the accessory. So accessory dwelling units today are interior, attached, or detached residential structures complete with independent living facilities, which include permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. So all of those things, the bathroom, the
Okay,
kitchen,
right.
the bedroom, closets, that's used in conjunction with, or that is accessory to the primary single-family dwelling. So if you had a room, like a big open room and a kitchen, that's not necessarily an ADU. If you have a bedroom, a closet, a bathroom, and a kitchen,
Right.
we're thinking
Which
ADU.
you could, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But the kicker on that though is, doesn't our ordinance say a dwelling unit has one kitchen?
We changed, if you remember, we
Did
changed
we finally change that?
these. So a dwelling unit, one or more rooms, providing complete independent living facilities for one family, including the permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. And then when we look at cooking facility, that means some combination of appliance and utility access that allows for sanitary preparation, a sink,
So
and
we no
storage
longer
of food.
say a single kitchen.
Exactly.
Okay,
So we
that's
fixed all,
good. We
yeah.
fixed that.
Right.
Thank you.
And so I feel more comfortable. My question, I just, like you said, when you reviewing the plan, it would be fairly obvious if it was basically like total living quarters.
Right.
like Mother-in-law or whatever versus a situation like I was, because at first it was kind of bothering me. I was just like, but I had forgotten that we did actually, the exact verbiage of how we changed it, because it clarifies it.
So with that said, you can have an attached vacation rental, just as long as you've never declared it as an ADU.
Correct, and so that would mean though that you would just have it wouldn't be its own separate, complete separate unit.
So let me ask you this, because
Unless you were allowed the 2 units. And then, sorry, Wayne, and then
Yeah.
there's a difference between pre-existing
Yeah.
and moving forward.
Okay. All right, that's minimal.
Yeah.
so in a situation like my house, and I have no intention of ever renting it out,
Mhm.
but if I sold it, if I did sell it, and technically, they can't rent that out because it was built as a single-family residence.
Mhm.
Isn't that true? They would have had to have gotten a permit for that to be an ADU. And then it could be rented out on long-term, but it wouldn't be able to be rented out on short-term.
Yes, I think that's correct.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
actually, it would,
Because it would have been built under a permit.
it was built under a building permit.
Well,
But not
an
the-
ADU.
Not the ADU wasn't listed in that permit.
He's saying he
Okay,
didn't
it
qualify.
wasn't listed as an ADU, but your permit covered the second kitchen and the second.
Yes.
Yes, so the second dwelling unit, even though it wasn't called an ADU, that was all built under a building permit and approved as a building, as an appropriately well-constructed kitchen.
Single-family dwelling.
Yeah, the dwelling was, but the unit, the facilities were under a building permit. So you could then say, hey, I want to use this as a vacation rental. No different than, hey, I want to use my spare bedroom as a vacation rental. Since you had it built as under a building permit, it satisfies that definition of short-term rental, does it not?
Yeah, based on the language, yeah. So Wayne,
Okay.
I see what you're saying. At the time it wasn't permitted as an ADU.
Mhm.
Is permitted as a single family dwelling. But moving forward, if somebody in your case, sorry, wanted to rent it for short-term rental purposes or long-term rental purposes, they would just come in the future and
Okay,
ask, go through the permitting process to do whatever it is they wanted to do with it.
okay.
Yeah. Yours is a unique case.
Well, I think there's a lot of them around town.
Yeah, and there might be.
Yeah, there's a lot, I know a lot of places, I mean, in the sixties and seventies, we
It
used
was
to build a
common.
lot of homes that it was their barn. And
Right.
it had a stove and it had a sink and it had their everything,
Mhm.
it had everything of a kitchen.
Right.
And a lot of them happen to be in the downstairs daylight basement type situation.
But in your case, do you have a bathroom, the kitchen, the
Yeah.
bedrooms? Yeah, so you have all of that. It's not
Yeah.
just like a basement with a bar, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So regarding the concerns about duration, does the commission want to consider increasing the allowed months of duration? Does commission want to consider removing the duration and going to a certain number of licenses? I think we don't have a good count on exactly how many residential units are in North Bend, but we have an estimate of about 3,500 developed residential units. And so what percentage of that would be acceptable to be licensed out and still show that you're, trying to meet housing needs?
Well, let me ask one more question. And Lawrence brought it up, and I don't know if I heard him correctly, but he said something about that he can't just change it from a short-term to a long-term rental. Is that, is there a way that we could, if we, let's just say we limited it, we take the time period that's going to be most advantageous for that, which would be maybe a 4-month period throughout the year, the summer months, they're going to make, they can rent that out as that, but then why couldn't it be to where then the remaining part of the year, they could rent it out on a long term over 31 days to people?
Right. I don't think there's any reason why they could not do that.
Okay. Would they have to pay the hotel tax and everything on the long-term rental part?
No.
So in essence, then Lawrence or Lanny, was that her name?
Mhm.
Laney or whatever, they could actually, if we extended it a little bit and made it 4 months or whatever the number is, that's what they could do short term without living there. In Lawrence's case, he could complete that one room and have that long term. And that's what we approved, I believe, was that then he could rent that out 365 days a year.
Correct.
In Lanny's situation, she would have to look at it 4 months or whatever the time period would be to do short term. And then the rest of the year, she would need to book 31 days or more for people. And she wouldn't have to pay the tax on that or any of that. It would be long term. Is that correct?
Well, and I would add that right now, our definition of like long-term permanent resident means an individual using any building continuously as a residence for a period of 6 consecutive months or more. Now, you could change that to say for 2 consecutive months or more to decrease the number of time you're looking to have people stay long-term. So what I'm saying is right now, we're saying that a long-term rental is 6 months or more. But if you were
I
to
see.
propose, you would have to change that number.
That would be to increase it from the 90 to 365 days. Someone would have to live in there.
Right.
6 months out of the year.
Right.
Correct? What I'm saying is, don't we also determine long-term rental as anything 31 days or more?
Yes, and so I hear what you're saying. So I guess what I'm saying is if you wanted to go that route to say, well, okay, so you can, anything over 4 months, now you can rent 31 days or more. We would just want to change the definition of a permanent resident to be somebody who stays 31 days or more, rather than 6 consecutive months.
I don't think we want to do that.
Yeah, I think that doesn't get, I don't think that would help their business, first of all. I don't think there's probably that many people that are looking to do an Airbnb for a month or 2.
Right.
And the reason that we ended up on that was, one, to keep people from coming in and buying up houses for Airbnbs, for short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
And then also to allow people that either lived in the home or vacationed in the winter, were gone in the winter, and they wanted to rent out their house while they were gone, they could do that as a short-term rental.
Mm-hmm.
So that was why we ended up where we did. And
Yeah, and I'm for the 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at it in a different way, not
Yeah.
determining that they would be able to rent it anymore. I'm just saying, if we allow them to, if we increase it from 90 days to 120 days, say,
Mm-hmm.
then they would be able to rent it out for the rest of the year No one else living in it, they could rent it out to someone for 31 days and it wouldn't be a short-term rental. Doesn't our code have short-term rental as less than 31 days?
Yes, but what I'm saying is per the proposal today, it says that we want to see a permanent resident in there to qualify for 365 days. And a permanent resident is somebody who's living there 6 consecutive months. So even more than 31 days, 6 consecutive months. So
Yeah,
it's
but
more
we're-
stringent.
We're not trying to get that
Yeah.
to where they can rent it out for 365 days.
He's just saying, could they use the property, you know, if they're restricted to only
Mhm.
92 days as a short-term rental, through the other 250 days,
Mhm.
could they do it for long-term rentals if they had
31
if they
days.
had people who wanted it?
Oh,
for
I see
31
what you're
days or
saying.
more?
Yes, yes,
And they wouldn't have to pay the tax on that 31
Correct.
days.
right.
Because our short-term rental code is defined as less than 31 days, I believe.
Yeah, currently, yes.
Do we have to amend the language?
No. So Wayne is saying that they're not trying to gain the ability to rent it out, on a week by week basis, all day, all year, but they'll go with the 4 months out of the year, and then the rest of the year, they'll have to do 2-month leases.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily get to have an Airbnb on a week, turnover basis all year round, but they could, for part of the year, still have,
The ability to.
yeah,
earn-
to
earn
rent
income.
the place. Yeah, correct. So I understand what you're saying now.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, but people who have long-term rentals want to have a long-term rental. They don't want to rent it for 3 months and then kick the people out. I'm sorry, not long-term, short-term.
Right.
Short-term. They don't want to rent it for 3 months and kick people out, or 4 months and kick people out. I don't think that's reasonable to expect them to do that.
I've heard
But-
scenarios where people come in for business obligations for several months and they're looking for a place.
Yes.
Well, sure, sometimes
Yeah.
they are, but I think it's unusual.
For
Yeah.
people who are moving here, looking for a house.
I'm just struggling with how you're gonna enforce all this. 31 days here and
Yeah.
2 months there. And
It would get into
what is the
it.
assumption that you're gonna, I mean, how are you gonna enforce, or
Mm,
even
Right.
attempt to enforce it?
Right, it would be, it would come down to the operator being, honest about their
Yeah.
dealings, and part of it would be when you do transient room tax, you're collecting the data for how many nights a year did you, rent, so you have that, but otherwise,
You're hoping for a hostile neighbor.
exactly, otherwise it's code, it's a complaint base, and that's pretty much everything citywide, so.
Well, you're finished, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's not a real, not a good answer for that, but the best we could do is just try to have regulations in place for if something were to come up.
That was where I was kind of, where I was kind of like,
Yeah.
kind of off of, I'm not sure, Lauren or what everybody brought up, having Airbnb collect the transit tax
Mhm.
and submit it directly to North Bend. I don't know what that would entail, or basically, I'm assuming you could make the host do that. But that would be the monitor there, in a sense, because anybody who's booking it, they're gonna automatically collect and pay the transit tax. And then if you're getting, $25 per stay for a tax, and you keep getting monies that are coming
Mhm.
in, that would be kind of evident if you're, if they were bootlegging it or something like that. That would be, to me, would seem a fairly easy
Mhm.
way, other than the time, obviously, for somebody's gonna have to, an additional duty or the time to do that. But I meant as far as regulatory of being able to, it wouldn't take much accounting to look at it and go.
Yeah.
You know,
And I've talked to our finance department about that, and I think they were supposed to be reaching out to Coos Bay to see how they do it. So we are thinking about that, trying to figure out what's involved.
You find that softer when you have the weather.
Right. Right. And if You guys have any questions for Jane? She's on, don't forget.
Don't worry, Facebook.
She's in our-
We can't talk to her.
You know, the housing issue concerns me. I think though that the ADU part of it is what I really want to hold fast to. Is that ADUs are for a very specific purpose, you know, and.
Right.
As well. So that, on the short-term rental, you know, the duration, I'm not sure, what's the trend? I mean, how, we can't, if I'm not mistaken, Jane, we can't say out of town people can't buy property. If I'm not mistaken, we can't discriminate against people from out of town. And
That's
so,
correct.
okay, so we can't say only vacation rental people, owners can be in town. We do require that they have an in-town manager, we do require that. You know, from what we heard last time, they could be very profitable, even with some limitations, so I guess, but I don't know how many are really 100% booked. I know there's vacation rentals down on the bay where we are, and the ones that say they're really well booked still have lots of gaps in them. So I don't know if we're hearing from the exception or the norm.
And I mean, not to say, but there might be a little bit of embellishment for the, you know.
Well, at that webinar that you
Mhm.
sent me to, it was a sales pitch, they did give some overall data. They said that typical stay in an Airbnb is 5 days, plus or minus. Typical occupancy is 3 to 4 people. They tend to attract a lot of groups and families. And so that was what I got good out of that one webinar. But other than that, it didn't give any indication of what typical is.
Well, I mean, I just think about what Wayne said, how he's getting a lot of inquiries into, you know, the market. And I just don't want to see houses bought up for short-term rentals, especially since we're in, you know, having housing issues. I'm not opposed to extending it maybe to 120 days. But I don't think we should allow year-round rental unless there's someone living on
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, by doing that, I mean, I kind of think it's a nice little caveat to the rule that we built in, you know, it's like if you have the ability, you have somebody who's there, you know, because then that's also falling in line of it's providing housing or somebody is gaining housing from there. And so, you know, I think, and that's basically kind of, I think, how we kind of wound our way down and settled on those, you know, some of those points. I mean, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Katie, you know, like I said earlier, maybe up and giving them a little bit more, but not, you know, 120. And, you know, it's like I had apologized if it impedes, you know, with, you know, where you're at. But again, residential areas are residential areas, you know. If I'm a mechanic and I decide I want to turn my 2-car garage into a grease monkey, you know.
Yeah, I could support 120. That's for a little year.
Tim, did you say you would support 120?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's, I mean, and not much more than that, because then we're getting away from where we literally had spent all of our work time, you know, of how we got there. And then you start going beyond that, to me, then we're literally just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, you know.
What do other people think about 120? Ron?
I am fine with either 90 or 120. But I still think that we need to consider people who already have invested a substantial amount of money planning to rent them out for more days than that. And y'all probably disagree with me.
What is it consider, what would you consider? What-
Well, I would like to see something where they could be grandfathered in, at least for a period of time to allow them to transition. And we discussed that, the next renewal of the business license or maybe longer than that. But, you know, if Lonnie's got 2 short-term rentals, you can't just change that overnight. You can't just change them. She's got mortgages. I assume she's got mortgages. She's got business plans. She's got her life built around this. Although she didn't permit it correctly, I agree, it's just hard to change that fast. And there are other people like Lonnie out there.
Yeah.
That's
My
what- that's
concern
what-
is how many might be out there that are doing it despite the fact that they didn't come in to find out if they could do it legally.
I have less compassion for them.
And that, well, did Lanny come in and ask for a permit?
So I'm sorry. I misunderstood what you said. I misunderstood what you said.
And I guess, I should add, not that, it's a big development cost, but nothing would prohibit somebody with a single family dwelling who wants to do full-time short-term rental from developing a detached ADU and using that to provide some kind of long-term housing. Maybe that's not their vision, but it would certainly get them to being able to have a short-term rental all year round and still provide the
Yes.
housing, it wouldn't have to be anything grand, but there's a path.
path.
There's a path forward,
So they could have a detached ADU.
for
For
long-term,
long-term, and that would enable them to have the whole house,
correct,
Yeah.
365.
correct.
Well, that's what Lawrence was doing. Lawrence
Yeah.
Mhm.
has that apartment. that was gonna be
Apartment, right,
full-time.
exactly.
But not every lot will allow that.
Yeah, I don't know, the ADU requirements are pretty lax to allow.
Squeeze them in.
But to be fair, right, not every, that wouldn't work for every case, but it's certainly something to consider. Right now, the way we address non-conforming rentals is to say that you have 120 days to come into compliance. So, whether you want to extend that time frame out or think about that more.
I have a question. We've only had 2 Airbnbs actually come in and get a conditional use as a bed and breakfast,
Yes.
however we did the conditional use. Lanny indicated she's paying occupancy tax.
Mhm.
How many of these Airbnbs are paying the occupancy tax even though they didn't get a conditional use?
And that is a good question.
Because the people who were responsible enough to come into the city to say, I have an Airbnb, do I have to pay tax?
Mhm.
Show a thoughtful planning that would indicate they just didn't know that they had to, less skirting the.
Oh, Jane has her hand
Oh,
up.
sorry, Jane.
It's okay. I don't know how many of you can see me. I didn't want to cut you off. But I think that if she's actually operating through the Airbnb website, I believe all of those taxes are collected through that website and sent in. So it's not like, and I'm not positive about this, and if Lonnie's still on, maybe she could tell us. But I think that Airbnb website helps collect all that stuff at once.
And Jane, that's what they, Lawrence and probably Lonnie are both speaking to. They want to see the city do that, to join that system and have Airbnb collect the taxes. And I've talked with finance about that. I don't know that we're doing it currently, but I know there's a way to do it. I
Okay.
just don't know how.
Okay, sorry, Laura, I see you, Lawrence, and so does Chelsea, but this part of the public hearing, I'm not sure if we're supposed to let you jump back in unless the chair wants you to, Diane.
You had a question with a
I'd
response
like
to
to
the
hear what
text.
Ryan.
I was gonna say that I believe that Rose just works with Lonnie to
Not currently.
Okay. All right.
But does the city know how many people, like how many people are paying the tax? Like,
I'm sure
to
we
get an
do.
idea of how many Airbnbs are.
Yeah. But you could, if you wanted to somehow, and Jane, help me out, if you wanted to somehow weed out those who have gone through some city process versus those who have not, when it comes to non-conforming, maybe there's a way to say, whether you say, well, those who are either paying transient room tax or have a conditional use permit, either get a year or 2 years to comply, or just get to be grandfathered in, or,
If something concrete like that, that
Mhm.
they have been paying occupancy tax, something easy to check,
Mhm.
I would be,
Maybe
under
send
something
them a
like
letter.
that, I might be willing to grandfather in some of the businesses.
okay, because that would
But
be,
just to say we grandfather everyone, it really concerns me.
mhm.
Diane, are you saying that, if they've been paying the transient tax, then we should give them an extended time over the 120 days that we allow?
We should allow them something. I haven't yet figured out what. Ron had said maybe we should have grandfather them in and not limit them to the 120 days or whatever we're talking about,
Something.
or something. But if they've been paying that tax, I would be much more willing to grant them a grandfather clause.
If we do this, what is the motivation of people who own Airbnb, who are running Airbnbs, to actually do anything to alert the city to the fact that they're doing it?
Just whether or not the city goes out and checks their Airbnb listings.
Which is never going to happen. And I'm sorry, this is not, I got to stay in my lawyer mode. That's something to consider. Like, if this is going to be completely unenforceable, all we're doing is penalizing the people who are doing it right, and leaving tons of people out there just doing their Airbnb over the internet and never telling us, and never paying transient taxes because they want to do it all year round.
True, but we still need to do the right thing.
Right.
Still need to do.
I mean, that's where I think if we can check with finance or get with the Airbnb, and if we can get on of where they're remitting, again, remitting those taxes, the transit taxes to us, then that would, for one, that basically, would be obvious who is and who isn't. You'd have a hard list.
Well, what kind of, I'm just saying, we could get the list. Okay, we can't, we know we can't. We have examples of people that are paying their taxes. What kind of grandfather condition, what kind of grandfathering exemptions are we talking about? Or are you guys talking about? I hadn't
What
thought
am
this
I
one.
talking about?
Yeah, granting them 365 days a year regardless of having a
No.
full-time resident. Granting them more time to come into compliance. What type of,
I would say granting them more time to come into compliance, only because I think if you granted them to allow to rent 365 days of the year, this is not really fair to anybody who wants to come in. There may be people, I think you mentioned, Brian, that you knew people that had purchased property with the intent to start an Airbnb. And that, so they have the same investment,
right,
they just haven't been operating.
If you try and give anybody, to me, something, and Jane would be the one, but to me, if you say, okay, because you've been good and you were paying your taxes, you can do it for 365, but you can't, that's automatically, it seemed like that would just set up a thing for a lawsuit. That would just be begging for somebody to go get a hold of Johnny Cochran.
From my standpoint, I'm probably more of a legalist on it, in the fact that if a contractor was out there working illegally and didn't have a license, and he gets caught, and we say, oh, well, you've already been doing it, so you can continue doing it. I mean, if you're gonna run a business, first thing you're supposed to do is find out the rules and the laws around the business. And that's the responsibility, that's the difference between a businessman and just anybody else out there. A businessman will look, research and do all the looking at.
So I think there's two questions. Did I freeze? I froze.
We can hear you, Jane.
Oh, okay. Going on here. One is, what do we do with people who have not gotten all of their permits? If we pass this, do we grandfather the people without permits in? And the other question is, do we grandfather the people who have gotten their permits in? And if so, on either end, for how long? I think as long as we keep those two things separate, it's a little bit easier to look at, because if you have the people with the permits and you can be like, okay, you guys were complying with the law as of this date, therefore you get this many years to work out a new financial situation. But if we don't have the permits and we didn't have any notice of that to begin with, that's a different situation.
Sure, there's only been 2 people get a conditional use, so that'd probably be the only 2 we'd even consider.
But there may be other people who've been paying occupancy tax thinking that that's what they needed to do. And to me, if they're paying the occupancy tax, they're trying to be a business.
Yeah.
Approaching it responsibly.
So we could word it that anyone that has been paying the transient tax has 1 year from the time of our adoption, not the time of them coming in, but from right
Right.
now, they got a year to correct and bring it up to standard instead of the, what are we giving now,
120 days, right.
Yeah,
And so, right, I would add something on that sentence that said, you get 120 days, except if you've been permitted and or are paying transient room taxes, which we can certainly get a list of those people. And then in that case, you get a year if that's what
Or a
commission.
business license.
Any city type permit, we probably wouldn't have given you, we shouldn't have given you a
or
business license.
License or conditional use.
Right, correct. So a city, I would say city permit or
Yeah.
transient, city
Now-
permit license or transient room taxes.
if it was more, if we put in the permitting though, they didn't have to have a license or anything until just this last year. North Bend didn't have city licenses. So if they were doing it a year ago or 2 years ago, and they've been doing it for 2 years, if they've been paying a transient tax, then if the city didn't tell them, hey, you need to be licensed, that's the city's fault.
Yeah,
Well-
and that's what we said.
Yeah,
It would,
Paying the tax would indicate responsible
Yes.
business operation.
yeah. I think we just need to keep it to just the transient tax or the hotel tax, whatever we call it.
Or conditional use.
okay,
Hopefully if they have got a conditional use, they're paying the tax, but.
Well, and for the conditional use, it's really just the one, because the other one, she lived, it was in her house. So
right,
she
but
But we have to document.
yeah, but we could still say that. I think that's doable. And do you guys agree a year is enough time?
I would almost think 2 years, just because their business model
Mm-hmm.
was based on something else. And
Okay.
so if you give them 2 years, it's very finite. They have to make decisions on how they're gonna proceed in the future. It gives them time to make decisions and they can continue renting it until they can sell it if they really can't do it.
I'd be more like, I'm with a year. I mean, to me, of using this COVID thing as an extreme example. You have, every business around in the nation there didn't expect something like this, yet this was dropped on their laps and they, you had to make modifications and done things just to cope with things.
So how long are you saying?
A year. And
A
a year
year.
is more than enough.
And you think 2 years is too much?
I do. I mean, we're going from 120 days to 2 years.
Yeah.
It just seems a little far to me personally.
What we could do, I mean, I think, I like the 2 years, but
I'd like
is
the 2 years.
you could give them 2 years within
2
the
days.
date of is it 2 years within the date of the
This is
acceptance?
adopted.
Okay,
Yes,
so never mind. I was gonna,
Now, we're still gonna have the 120 days
correct,
unless they've been paying the transit or the
Correct.
hotel tax.
Yeah.
right.
So we're only talking about those that tried to do it right and were paying a hotel tax. Are we willing to give them a greater length of time?
Mhm.
And so,
I mean, I'm more than willing to do whatever, the majority decides, but like I said, my personal opinion, I think 1 year is plenty.
it seems to me a year is
support
enough.
Huh?
It seems to me a year is enough.
I would support 2 years only because that gives them time, if they needed to build an ADU, if they wanted to keep it as a short-term rental, or if they needed to move it to a long-term rental or sell it. I don't know.
I don't know if you can get permits to do that and get it built within a year.
For what?
Oh, if you wanted to build an ADU and get it permitted and do all those things, I
Easily,
don't know if you can do it in a year, can you?
easily.
In North Bend, you can.
Yeah,
Sorry, I lived in Lakeside for 14 years.
yeah, you can have a permit in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Okay, so,
Can I just ask commission, I think there's three things I'm looking at, the ADU
I
provisions,
was gonna
the,
actually go through the consensus.
okay,
on
right,
each of
the
three
duration
things.
and the non-conforming, okay.
Okay.
We can just kind of touch on all of those and
Okay,
then,
so let's get some consensus, and then we'll make our recommendations. Okay, so what we're talking about right now is the grandfather, the responsible grandfather clause.
Short-term rental.
Yeah, for short-term rental, how long, let's see, Kate, you said 2, you were
I would support 2 years.
2 years. I'm inclined to go 2, just because it takes you a while to figure out what you're doing. Tim?
I said a year, but I'd be willing to, I'm not gonna, but we get a majority, then
Okay.
I'm more than willing to go with it.
All right, Ron,
I support 2 years.
2 years? Wayne?
I'd probably go for a year, but I'm not gonna buck it too.
Okay,
Year, I'll go majority.
We're
Okay.
split down the middle.
The majority
so right
doesn't
now
care.
we're 3-3, but you guys who were on board for 1 year were the ones who agreed to concede. So you guys are just too generous. So,
I don't think there's gonna be more than 1 or 2 that are paying the tax.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I
agree.
don't think so either, so that's why I'm fine giving them more time.
Yeah.
because I think they'll be limited.
In fact, nothing against Lanny, until somebody says somebody's been paying it, I'm skeptical. It was gonna be paid.
Yeah, and we'd have to have record of it.
Okay, so let's say that.
And she'd have to pay it, what'd she say, over 300 days last year, so did she pay that much transient tax?
Okay, so
She says yes.
the grandfather
Yeah.
clause, everyone's still.
That's good.
The grandfather clause
That's great.
is 2 years,
okay.
okay? Next thing was the ADUs.
ADUs,
Attached and detached.
none of them should be used.
Just revise it to just ADUs, do not.
No ADU, okay?
No ADU can be used as a short term.
None,
Okay.
1, 2,
So can I,
3.
can I
Well,
get
I'm gonna ask you in just a second. Okay, Kate said no, I said no, you said no right off.
I'd say no, yeah, no
Okay,
short-term rental.
Ron, your turn.
can I get a clarification on that?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Let's say that somebody, the definition seems to be for an in-house ADU seems to be complete living facilities versus a spare room.
Yes,
Would someone have the opportunity to declare either an ADU or a vacation rental, but not both?
if you came in and had not declared an ADU, and you wanted to put a vacation rental in there, it would be permittable
Without
by building
the,
permit, because you no longer say you can only have 1 kitchen.
correct. We don't say you can only have one, we say dwelling unit is composed of these things,
Yeah.
and so,
So you might have a bedroom, a room that could serve
Yeah.
as a bedroom next to a great room type of thing. So if you have the facilities and they've already been built under a building permit, they weren't fly by night, I did it myself. they actually, they were built for a building permit, you could come in and ask for a vacation rental.
But it would be the
Okay.
smaller unit. Like in my case, it would be the small unit would have to be long-term, because that would be the ADU.
Well, it would have to be whichever one, without worrying about the long term. If you under a building permit built a house or modified a house, so there were two areas that could be zoned off, is that better said that way? Could be zoned off into two dwelling units. You could say, I want it to be an ADU, the basement wanted to be an ADU. And you come in and get that permit, and you could even construct it under that permit. But once you do that, it cannot be a vacation rental. But if you come in and say, hey, I've got this spare room, I can easily close these doors and put locks on them, it'll work great as an independent living, I want to be a vacation rental, you could. Because it was built under a building permit, and it had never been declared an ADU.
But wouldn't it depend on the zoning?
No, because we're saying vacation rentals can go in any residential zone.
And I believe ADUs can go in any residential zone.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So to give the example like we used earlier, if Wayne sold his house, I bought Wayne's house.
Mhm.
And then I went in there, so I can just to decide of either going down and saying, I want my lower area there, I have another living space. I can choose to either make it an ADU or do nothing, or choose to make it a short-term, provided I followed our rules. So an existing one like Wayne's, you theoretically would have the option of doing any one of the three.
Mhm.
Correct?
No, because they would take my unit and that would then be an ADU, because the ADU has to be smaller than the main
Oh,
house.
if you wanted an ADU, you'd have to choose the smaller basement unit as the ADU.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But
But
on
I'm
a
saying,
vacation rental, you could rent any part of it you want.
And so the ADU then would be the smaller part, because it has to be the smaller part.
yes,
That could be a long-term rental, and they could rent out the big house as a vacation rental.
You could.
yeah,
Mhm. You
yeah,
could.
you totally could. But that's what I was saying is if I bought it, I basically, and I had the choice of doing either one of,
3 options.
yeah, or more, but
Yeah, as long as the record shows that you had all of that permitted. Somebody couldn't just come in and say, oh, I've had this, apart from those who are really old, but, like all of a sudden,
it'd be pretty awesome.
if something looked obviously like I just threw this together, and they were trying to scheme the system, then there might be red flags. But if there was, certainly if there was a record that said, hey, this was permitted, it's all legit, you want it to be a short-term rental, okay, call it that, and then we'll move on.
Oh, okay.
All right, we're back to Ron.
Okay, so what was the question?
Do you want any ADU to be able to be converted into a short-term rental?
I'd say no.
Okay.
If you have the option to declare it at one time.
Right.
I'd say no.
Brian?
Nope, defeats the purpose of ADUs.
Okay.
Yep.
So that, we don't want any ADUs. And we've only had one built in town, right?
We've actually had a couple.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
cool.
I mean, a lot of them have been attached, like inside.
Okay. The next question was the thing I brought up about location. It seemed to die for lack of second, which is fine. Do you want to put any restrictions on how many ADUs or how many vacation short-term rentals are allowed, or the density of short-term rentals in neighborhoods?
Not this time.
No? Okay, I like that.
Yeah, I just think it'd be too.
Yeah, I would say it's too,
Wait.
it'd be too hard
Yeah, but wait, I like the idea, but I don't know
if it's legal.
how to enforce it.
Is that something we should come back in a year and revisit and see if you've been swamped with tons of?
Yeah, start seeing, if you'll start to see a trend of every house start getting sold, and then you maybe put some brakes on it, but at this time, we're talking, what, 20?
Yeah, or if
Yeah,
a whole
maybe.
neighborhood turned into short-term
Yeah.
rentals. Then
If it looked like it was becoming a problem, we could certainly revisit it.
This isn't summer.
Let's keep it simple. How about you?
This is what, Brian?
This isn't summer.
Son of a
It's not?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so no location density restrictions
at this time.
at this time. Okay,
Okay.
We
next.
reserve the right to revisit.
Duration, if you do not have a full-time, what do you call that?
Long-term.
Permanent resident, long-term resident. Okay, right now it's at 92 days. We've had proposals for 92 or 120. Were there any other proposals?
What?
Okay, we've been talking about giving them, that they can operate 92 days or 120.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so were there any other options? Oh, I like this consensus stuff. Okay,
120.
120,
120.
okay,
120 is fine.
okay,
Yep, 120.
okay. Okay, 120. All right, I lost my list of questions. Did I get them all?
Now, let me ask you one more question on that, just so that Lawrence, Lanny, any of the people that are trying to plan their
Mhm.
business plan, they're limited to 120 days, but there's nothing stopping them from renting it out for 31 days, and that is actually, because short-term rental is less than that.
Correct.
So they could actually plan it out, and they could say, okay, well, this time of the year, we're only gonna rent it out for 31 days. And then they'll do the lesser time in the peak time, or they mix it up however they want.
That would be a correct, yeah, a loophole around having to do a 6-month lease.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
They were creative.
yes.
They could give, this is, I don't know what it is, but they could give a smoking deal for a 31-day lease. And whatever the price, and there's no transient tax.
That's my understanding of the way the code reads right now. It's only 30
Smoking deal for a
Like
31-day,
$10 a day.
whatever they turns them on.
I was gonna say, I know these rent for a week if it's cheaper than 6 days.
You could rent it to your child for
Right,
32 days for
Mhm.
$5, and then you're in compliance, correct?
Well, it's gotta be profitable to them.
yeah,
That's their
Yeah.
profit.
All
right.
right, so did I miss any other topic that we were discussing? Any other condition of this? Okay, so what I have is we reviewed the conditions, the ordinance that Chelsea compiled from our previous work session. And in it, we so far have come up with the idea that we'd like to support changing 92 to 120 days. That we not add any location density restrictions. That we exclude all ADUs from being short-term rentals. And that we add a grandfather clause, or add to the grandfather clause, or change the grandfather clause, so that if they have demonstrated payment of occupancy tax.
Or
Or
conditional
and-
use.
Or conditional use, they will be granted 2 years of operation at their existing, whatever, before the conditions apply to them. Before the number of days condition applies to them. All the other conditions will have to be brought up. They have to have the notifications, they've got to have they have to have the tsunami
Mhm.
exits, everything except the days of operation. So, any more discussion?
Yeah, we're only talking about the ones that haven't already gotten the cut. Like the lady up there on Sherman, they agreed that they would comply to whatever we wanted. This is
Yeah.
only for people that have been paying it but haven't applied for a cut already and been granted. Correct?
No, if they've gotten a cut, or if they have been paying taxes, we will grant them the 2 years. I think everyone, I mean, for example, Lawrence has been paying his taxes and he got cut. But we're gonna give him 2 years to come into compliance. Right? We're also gonna go out and see someone who didn't get a cut, but they've been paying their taxes, they can have the 2 years too. Does that make sense?
And then anybody else, 120 days.
Yes.
Okay,
And the other loophole that probably is not gonna occur is if someone had gotten that cut and hadn't actually gone into, haven't paid any taxes yet because they haven't really gotten started.
Mhm.
But I think that's probably moving there.
Yeah, I think both CUPs are paying their
I think
taxes.
so, yeah. All right, well, if this is an idea, I would entertain a motion to make a recommendation to the city council. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'll make the motion with the city council with the notes that you have taken, if you would.
For additional,
Do I have to read her notes?
It would be, well, it would be good, you would recommend based on
Based on the,
okay,
increasing the duration to 120 days.
revise, revise to ADUs not, shall not be used as a, I would love it.
okay, Brian's dice for lack of second.
We recommend that the city council approve case file number AMD 1-20 and adopt by ordinance the findings, conclusions, and recommendation of planning commission as presented in the planning commission recommendation to approve case file number AMD 1, oh, I read that twice, sorry. To reflect testimony, evidence, and comments received during the public hearing, and to include the following four changes. Amend the grandfather clause, if the applicant demonstrated payment of occupancy tax or have a conditional use permit, they get 2 years to bring it into compliance for the days of operation. Exclude all ADUs as short-term rentals. No restrictions on density of short-term rentals, and change 92 days to 120 days to operate if there is no long-term resident on the property.
Second?
Oh,
Could we have a roll call because of
Sure
the
can.
medium?
okay, first up, any further discussion? Okay, without any, I'm gonna ask each individual to say aye or nay, if you're in a concurrence or in opposition. Okay, Tim?
Aye.
Okay, Ron?
Aye.
Wayne?
aye,
Brian?
Aye.
Jake, okay. And I also am aye. Okay, this motion passed to make this recommendation to the city council. Excellent. Good discussion.
Yeah.
Really good discussion. All right, let me find my agenda again. All right, the next item on the agenda is other business. Chelsea, do you have anything for us?
I do not currently have anything. Well, I should say that our wonderful planning permit technician, minute taker, PC helper, Ryan Wortman is leaving us. His last day is the end of this month. And so we will miss him. He is off to greener pastures, literally.
Actually, it was much greener.
Uh-huh.
When the sirens go off, it means tornado. Okay?
My kind of excitement.
It's been a pleasure working with all of you.
Ditto.
Yes, good one.
Yeah.
All right, public comment. I think we have no more public.
We don't have anybody
All
signed up.
right, last is commissioner's comment, and I have one. I am going to need to resign in the very near future. You know, when my kids came to visit during the COVID first round, my husband and I moved out to our little cottage on the bay, and we decided we love living in 700 square feet out of all of our crap. And so, but we don't know what we're gonna do with all our crap. And it turns out the kids have returned, so they're they're in the House. I'm not sure exactly when we will officially dissolve our North Bend residents, but definitely before the end of the year. And I'll submit a letter, so you might want to think about who, if you know of any good people.
We will miss you. Everybody's leaving.
Well, I can just depart now, but, like I said, I really don't know what our schedule is. And so I don't, if you guys will have me, I'll stick around for a couple more months.
When's your term in?
December.
In December.
Wait a minute, do I have another year?
I don't know without looking.
I thought you had
on
another 3
my
years.
page.
Yeah, but I definitely won't be around that long. I really like 700 square foot. And we just purchased a big old shop next door, so that was the thing we were missing.
So Diana, is that local, just not in North Bend?
It's not North Bend, correct?
Yeah.
It's Charleston technically.
And you have to be a registered voter within the city of North Bend.
And I
So
currently
just
still
have some
am.
mail sent to Chelsea.
I know,
Well,
right?
you know, I'm not building an ADU and renting it myself, but no.
Just another thought, I've noticed codes in the past that do allow for one person to be on commission that live outside.
You checked and we don't have that, right?
No, not currently,
So
no.
maybe probably council discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
An avenue would be that.
yeah. No, I love doing this. I don't
Maybe-
even know how long.
Maybe
I've
that's
been
why
doing
she's
it.
moving.
No, actually, I'm gonna miss this. I love this. You don't know how long I've been on.
I don't know how long you've been on, no.
I know I got on it after I came in and made a request for a vacation and I made a really stupid call, so I can.
So you've probably been on it since almost you lived here, probably.
So when are you saying Brian has to be ready to take over the ship? Because he is the vice.
If you want me to just be gone, I'll leave now. Otherwise, it will probably be a few months before we figure out exactly what we're gonna do and I start changing addresses and stuff.
I think we're gonna drag every last minute.
I just would like you to figure out how long I've been a commissioner.
Okay, I can do that. Yes, ma'am.
It's long enough, she'll get a gold watch when she goes.
I should get a plaque from the city.
You should.
Do something.
I can gavel.
Well, it seems like.
Yeah.
Oh, you can keep the gavel. We're getting rid of that. In fact, it's a hoot. My husband actually got to that point. We go to the house now and just, oh my God, what are we gonna do with all this stuff? And even he is throwing stuff away, giving stuff away.
Yeah, like.
I hear someone say, hey, I need to buy a bed. Oh, I have a bed. Come on over.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I
And
mean, sad,
literally,
but awesome.
we literally went out with an overnight bed
Really?
and we liked it.
I will find that out and you will be
And I like
recognized.
this. a whole
Unless
lot
we
better
change the
than
code.
Don't put that on.
Does anybody else have any comments?
Yes, any others? Anyone else leaving? All right. Adjourn.
Okay, now that we're adjourned,